Ruler of Beasts, Chapter 10. The lion rolled to his feet, looking around frantically. Ozma lay crumpled next to him, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. She looked unconscious. Or dead. The lion swallowed hard. She had to be fine. She had to be. Panic welled up in his chest. What was he going to do now? Everything was up to him. He remembered the terrible darkness in the tunnels and the way he'd thought it was alive. He didn't want to die down here in this awful place. But then he remembered Ozma's strong, powerful voice when she challenged the darkness and felt ashamed of himself. He was a lion, and not just any lion, but a king bearing the wizard's gift of courage. He would be strong. He looked around again, confidence flooding through him. They had landed in some kind of cavern. The walls were lined with torches that burned with a blue fire and did little to dispel the darkness. The ceiling was high enough to be lost overhead in blackness. The clanging noise was almost deafening, and the air was even hotter than it had been in the tunnel they had just left. The man who had spoken was looming over him. The lion recognized him instantly. He looked exactly like the pale, terrifying king from the banquet hall. His skin was a sickly white, his icy pale eyes glittering evilly in the blue torchlight, and he wore robes as densely black as the darkness that surrounded them. But instead of the long white hair the king in the painting had, this creature was as hairless as an egg. He seemed both ancient and ageless at the same time. There was something fathomless, cold, and cruel, and very, very old in his eyes. An iron crown, wrought in the shape of thorny branches, rested on his bald head. He carried a staff topped with a glowing blue crystal. There was no mistaking him for anyone other than the Gnome King. The lion drew himself upright, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. I am the once cowardly Lion of Oz, bearer of courage of the Wizard of Oz, and King of the Beasts, and I demand you to cease your invasion of Oz at once. He shouted over the clanging, hoping fervently that Oz would wake up any minute. The Gnome King laughed and waved one hand. Around him the darkness seethed, and suddenly he was surrounded by pale, thin warriors in black armor, their faces hidden by black helmets. The lion's heart missed a beat, but he held his ground, determined not to show his fear. You're a long way from home, little cat, the Gnome King hissed. Do you really think you're in a position to be making demands? He leaned forward, and the lion took an involuntary step back. The crystal on top of the Gnome King's staff blazed with a blue-white light. At last the king saw the source of the terrible metallic noise. At one end of the huge cavern, a vast, many-armed machine of iridescent blue metal the lion had never seen before was chipping away at the rock. More bald gnomes. These, stoop-shouldered and scuttling, wearing leather aprons over their shirtless chests, stoked a furnace at the heart of the machine, dumping load after loads of coals into the glowing inferno. They wore thick black glass goggles on tattered leather straps to protect their eyes from the heat. Huge leather gloves clanking with chain mail kept the coals from burning their hands. They were all pale as mushrooms, but coated in black dust, their lean, wiry bodies scattered and burned where the leather had not been enough to protect them. Many of them had carved elaborate designs into their bare arms and chests, and packed the cuts with coal dust, so that their skin seemed covered in dense black lace. Others had shoved chunks of iron through their earlobes, noses, or lips. Moving together, they looked like an army of sinister beetles, pushing their burdens back and forth like ants carrying food back to their nests. I have been working for a long time to reach the glorious country of Oz, the Gnome King snarled. Do you think I'll stop now because a snippy little house cat says I should? You'll stop because the Queen of Oz tells you no, said a high, clear voice behind the lion. The Gnome King's sneer transformed momentarily to a look of shock. The lion whirled around. Ozma stood tall and proud, her wings spread out to their full span and her golden veins glowing, her dark hair whipped around her head, crackling with electricity. Her green eyes had darkened to a black, and her enchanted orb blazed with a green light that rivaled the Gnome King's crystal. The two rulers stared at each other, neither of them giving it an inch. If it isn't Lorraine's little protege, the Princess of Oz, the Gnome King laughed, recovering quickly from his surprise. Do you really think your magic is a match for mine, child? I'm the Queen of Oz now, Ozma said coldly. "And you know it is, old man. Abandon this foolish plan and leave my country in peace. There is no reason for war between our peoples." "Oh, there's plenty of reasons," the Gnome King said, waving his arm again. The cavern wall behind him shimmered and dissolved into a window into another world. The sky was a dark, stormy gray over barren fields where blackened stalks of corn and wheat looked like skeletons. A harsh wind blew dust storms across the desolate landscape, whipping against the crumbling stone walls of a tiny village that looked abandoned. But as the lion looked more closely, he saw gaunt, desperate faces in the windows of the houses. A starving dog limped through the empty streets, too hungry even to howl, and the wall was lined with, the lion flinched in horror, heads. Some were human, and some were creatures he didn't recognize at all, creatures he's never seen before. As they watched in horror, a group of strange, terrifying creatures descended into the desolate villages. Their bodies were human, but their arms and legs were the same length, so that they moved on all fours. How could they move so quickly? The lion wondered. And then he saw that the creatures' feet and hands had been replaced by whirling spiked wheels. As they drew closer to the village, he could see their clothes. Crazed, clashing patchworks of garish colors that stood out harshly against the washed-out landscape. Their eyes were mad and wild. Some of them hefted a blazing torch aloft and with a screech of laughter hurled it into the nearest house. The straw roof caught immediately, and soon the entire hovel was ablaze, as its inhabitants poured out into the dirt street in terror. More of the wheeled creatures set fire to the village, shrieking with glee and laughing and pointing at its helpless, sobbing inhabitant. "Behold the land of Ev," hissed the Gnome King. "The deadly desert is expanding. The drought is so severe nothing can grow. The wheelers terrorize my subjects. The magic itself is seeping out of the land unless Oz shares its bounty. The country is doomed." He glanced back at his warriors. "Plus, I'm getting really tired of living underground," he said in a more conversational tone. "Bad for the complexion, you know, and the only thing to eat is mushrooms. I'm really sick of mushrooms." Ozma looked stunned. "I did not know it was so bad there," she whispered. "The people above the earth are starving," the Gnome King said. "The riches of Oz are vast. Why would you not agree to share them? From what I hear, the Emerald Palace is plenty big enough for two." His words were reasonable, but there was a dangerous glitter in his pale eyes. The lion remembered himself. He was the king of the beasts and the protector of Ozma, and he was not to be trifled with. "You didn't ask to share," the lion roared furiously. "You're tunneling under the deadly desert to invade Oz." The Gnome King barely flinched at the lion's fierce roar. He drew himself up to his full height, his eyes blazing. "Did you expect us to beg, lion? To come crawling through the desert like some poor relation? Oz is no greater country than Ev, and no more deserving of its riches." "But why are you invading?" the lion protested. "You could have sent a messenger, anything other than spending years digging under the desert in secret." "The wizard was no friend of the land of Ev," the Gnome King said coldly. "I did not know Ozma had replaced him." The lion narrowed his eyes. "He's lying," he thought. Did Ozma guess? If she did, she was hiding it. What did she have up her sleeve? He made a noise of protest, but Ozma held up a hand to silence him. "My dear brave lion," she said gently, "the Gnome King is right. If the wizard is partly responsible for the suffering of the people of Ev, it's our duty to help him. I will do what the king asks, if it means avoiding war." How could the wizard be responsible for if no one knew for certain that Ev even existed? Ozma wasn't making any sense. But the Gnome King's eyes lit up, and his warriors took a step back, apparently deciding they would not be needed to defend him. "We have been preparing for a war for a long time, and my people are angry," he said. "Peace will not be quite as easy as you think, Ozma. Ev is not some charity case that you can dismiss with a few loaves of bread." "How can we avoid battle?" Ozma asked, her eyes wide. Lion couldn't believe she was still negotiating, when it looked like she had already lost. The Gnome King was silent for a moment, and then a slow, nasty smile spread across his face. The lion shivered. and cursed his courage for leaving him when he needed it most. "I will make you a bargain," he said. "You will allow me to use my magic to disguise you. If your little companion can recognize you, I will return to Oz." "And if he fails?" The Gnome King smiled. "If I am to sacrifice everything, then your cost must be a great one too. If he fails, you will remain enchanted. Forever." Ozma tilted her head, considering. "If you return to Ev, you're not sacrificing anything at all except a war with my people." "You see what Ev is like now," the Gnome King hissed. "This is our last chance to survive. If you defeat me, Princess Ozma, my kingdom is ruined. My people will starve. I will not dream of asking any less of you." "No!" the lion roared. "If you are enchanted, Princess, he will claim Oz for himself." "Perhaps," the Gnome King said idly, picking his nails with a triumphant look on his eyes. "That's not—" the lion began desperately, but Ozma cut him off. "He gets 6 guesses," she said. The Gnome King laughed. "Are you kidding?" 5. 3, he said, rolling his eyes. "I'm not—" the lion said. "Agreed," Ozma interrupted, extending her hand to the Gnome King. He took it, and their clasped hands blazed with a searing green light. Green lightning cracked across the cavern, and for just a second a cool, refreshing breeze wafted past them. The Gnome King yelped in surprise and yanked his head back. "What have you done, witch?" "I'm a fairy, not a witch," the Ozma said calmly, "and I've bound you to your word with all the power of Oz." The Gnome King stared at her, his eyes glittering with suspicion, but Ozma returned his gaze with an innocent smile. "May I speak to the lion before you enchant me, your highness?" she asked sweetly. He scowled. "If you must. But be quick about it. My people are hungry. I am not interested in delays." Ozma knelt down beside the lion and hugged him. "Trust me, dear lion," she whispered into his ear. "But how will I know you?" the lion asked. "What if I fail?" "You won't," Ozma said confidently. "You can't." That was hardly reassuring when Ozma was already standing up to face the king. "I'm ready," she said. The Gnome King's smile was so sinister that even the lion's courage faltered. He raised both arms, and his robes opened slightly, revealing an elaborate ruby necklace glittering at his throat. The ruby necklace the lion recognized immediately. It was the necklace Glinda had showed him in the Forest of the Beasts. He blinked. Was it possible? Did the Gnome King have the necklace Glinda was looking for? How had he gotten it? Ozma's eyes narrowed. She'd seen that necklace, too. Did she know what it was? But there was no time to think about that now. The Gnome King flicked his wrists, and the cavern began to fill with a silvery, foul-smelling mist. The lion covered his face with his paws, but he could help breathing in the noxious fumes. "Replactium cercotium," the Gnome King hissed, and the weird mist evaporated. Coughing, the lion looked up. The floor of the cavern was covered with tiny silver figurines that looked exactly like the Queen of Oz. And Ozma was gone.